Greetings, one and all. First of all, greetings to Nicola.
All right.
Correct me if I say it wrong. Kia ora?
Kia ora. Very good. Yeah.
Okay, sort of. I'm getting there.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Dr. Nicola Hoggard-Creegan, a recent friend of mine, I'm honored, is a well-known personality in the field of science and religion, or faith and science, whatever we want to call it, or theology and science. She's a New Zealander, a Wellington-based theologian, but who has a very interesting background in the sciences. Nicola asked me not to go through my usual introductory part, but you know me, I'm always disobedient, and I really want people to know who my interviewees are. And for this reason, I'll just go straight to Amazon, where the viewers will be able to find quite a number of publications, either authored by Nicola or edited by her. Perhaps you see now the classical work, Animal Suffering, the Problem of Evil, talking about mysteries and how to approach mysteries, creation and hope, and of course, feminism and the Theological Academy. This one is interesting for me from a different angle. Now, you can find many places where Nicola has her profile more or less extensive. This is in her capacity as chair of the New Zealand Christians in Science. This one is the Faraday Institute. What else do we have? Encyclopedia.com has an article on Nicola, and to stop embarrassing her, I won't be sharing anything else. She has recently been accepted as a fellow of the International Society for Science and Religion. I have been privileged to watch the fairly recent annual lecture of the society, where the speaker actually mentioned Nicola quite 4 or 5 times. I was so proud of you. Eh?
To disagree.
I know. So it doesn't matter how much academics can disagree with one another, but the fact that the speaker felt the need to mention you so many times shows that you made a case and you pointed something out, something that he had to address. Doesn't matter the outcome. It doesn't matter the where this conversation of yours might lead. Anyway, it's a privilege to have you, Nicola.
Thank you.
We are also somehow colleagues at Discast.
Yeah.
Nicola serves in the editorial board of the newly relaunched journal Christian Perspectives on Science and Technology. And we also work together towards mounting a special stream for the ANZATS conference. It's the biggest theological event of the year in Australia and New Zealand. A stream, of course, dedicated to faith and science. Unfortunately, Nicola landed in Sydney for the purposes of attending the conference, but coped COVID, so she contributed remotely. But anyway, it has been a very interesting experience working with you in preparation of that stream of papers. Nicola, of course, there are many topics that we can address together, and many reasons for which I have invited you. One of them is the fact that somehow, although we come from different parts of the world and we had very different trajectories somehow, at least in our formative years. You have begun your training as a mathematician and someone heavily invested in the physical sciences, the natural sciences, and then ended up by embracing theology. I'm a theologian by training, or a theologically trained Christian, as I enjoy saying, who has developed over the years a keen interest in the sciences, the natural sciences. Hence my affiliation with a number of bodies in science and faith, or faith and science, and so on and so forth. There are also interests that we share in common, and one of them is our desire to bridge the two worlds of Christian theology and the natural sciences. Of course, we tread different paths there. There's also something that might be I don't know, a topic to avoid. I try to address it with other speakers, and they weren't brave enough. I hope you are.
What's that?
The destiny of someone who works at the nexus of different disciplines in the academia.
All right.
Well, I can tell you a bit of my story, if you like, to unfreeze the ice age. Yeah, so as a theologically trained person with a keen interest in the natural sciences, and developing a sense of necessity to engage the scientific culture of our age for the purposes of communicating the theological message in a cogent way, I have experienced opposition, marginalization, and so forth, both in Romania and here in Australia.
Yeah.
So it's not easy to work as a theologically trained person, as an academic theologian, and also a person in the church in this field where people are suspicious. They actually, well, that was a recurrent accusation leveled at me for many years, that I'm some kind of New Ager. Thank God, New Age is now extinct, so no one remembers what that means. And it's still difficult to navigate these waters when what you try to do is provide your fellow Christians with tools that they can put to a good use, you know, to communicate the message of Christian theology to broad audiences. And the reward is being burned at the stake, having your career demolished, and so on and so forth. That's me. I don't know about you.
I know that's me too, Doru. Yes, absolutely. I think it depends what you're trying to do. Now, if you really want to dig deep into, especially the intersection of biology and theology, it does seem to get very tricky. And you know, I mean, although I did train in mathematics and in science, and you know, my early influence was to sit around my parents' house reading Teilhard de Chardin. So I was into theology from a young age, but I was a Catholic, you see, and you weren't really meant to study theology if you're a Catholic. So, and my parents were quite scientific, so I sort of studied mathematics. But I'm very glad I did. But you know, of course, he was somewhat suspect. Of course, you know, he wasn't allowed to publish during his lifetime and all those sorts of things. And you would think that things would get better after that, especially in the last 50 years. There has been so much written in this area, but it doesn't really make the church any more open to it than it was. And I remember being so full of enthusiasm about evolution in my theology classes, and just being met with absolute horror from bunches of Calvinist men, especially. They're not always,
Man,
not
okay.
always men.
So maybe it's not the theological thing there.
No, no. But I was just trying to sort of show how wonderful it is. And I do think that, that theology has to embrace science and it has to dialogue with science if it's going to live at all. And so I wasn't very apologetic for doing this, but it certainly was very, very difficult.
Mm.
Yeah. And I remember I was overseas in 2012 at the Centre for Theological Inquiry, which was doing a sort of science and theology year, where scientists were interacting with, evolution, people in the evolution of science and the cognitive science of religion. And I heard from somebody that somebody had said that the dean had said in a faculty meeting that evolution should only be talked about amongst faculty and not in public. So nobody ever had told me that, but very soon after that, my career there did come to an end. Yes.
Well, actually, our lives are very similar, if not identical, at least from this viewpoint. I remember my first years in Bucharest. I was an assistant lecturer in the Department of Orthodox Theology in the University of Bucharest, and whatever reasons, politics in the department and so on and so forth, I was kept an assistant lecturer for 9 years or so. Although I had a lot of research outputs under my belt, and with a PhD in 2000, so I started working there in 95. And after 2000, because I wasn't given any opportunity to upgrade, after 9 years, or almost 9 years then, I started to look elsewhere, other universities. And one of them, I won't mention that university, it's the Romanian university. Local leadership, both church and academic, accepted me as a visiting lecturer for a year. And although I was entrusted with lecturing in what they call their fundamental theology, which is more like apologetics kind of stuff, I was called after a few weeks upstairs, inverted commas, not very high, but upstairs, above my pay grade, to be told something similar. Keep your opinions for yourself.
I know, it's just so sad, isn't it? Yes.
And someone who was actually even higher than the upstairs that I had to talk to or account to initially, told me, "You have killed my God."
Oh, really? Oh my goodness. That's very severe.
Because I was talking about a God that, although majestic, magnificent, splendid, and all that, although those are human terms, not the divine claims, our God is kenotic. Our God is humble, is patient with the billions of years of a nature that needs to grow up, to mature. The way God doesn't make us, all of a sudden in the womb of our mothers. Now we're conceived, and the next moment we are born.
No,
it takes us some time to be born, isn't it?
Exactly.
And if we extrapolate this cosmically, this is what happens everywhere in the universe and in nature.
Exactly. That's right.
So I killed his God.
I mean, it always surprises me that some sort of anti-science position that sees everything happening suddenly and humans as being very different from, all the rest of creation, is seen as somehow or other theologically, morally superior to the evolutionary one. And evolution is often seen as somehow or other morally suspect, even though, of course, it's true. And that always surprises me, you know. So, I mean, I agree there are all sorts of things to wrestle with, and that it does change the theological landscape, but it's also the most exciting, you know, area to think theologically, I think, you know, in the interaction with science, especially biology. Yeah.
Well, could you share more specifics of your approach? I am a beginner in terms of going through your literature, your contributions, your publications. I'm yet to finish your book on animal suffering, but I found and find your approach very refreshing, realistic, insightful, and eye-opening on many levels. But could you share with us a few more things for the benefit of the viewers, please?
Well, I suppose that, you know, the problem of evil, of course, is huge in theology, and it's probably responsible for many people losing faith, as is the interaction with science. You know, people feel they've got to choose one or the other. And I think we can sort of see that in embracing evolution, and, you know, really indwelling our hominid becoming over millions of years, and our prehistory, and then the sort of mammalian history which precedes it, and then animal sciences which show how enormously complex and conscious and sentient many animals are, especially mammals. We sort of open up a Pandora's box, because at the same time that we have to re-examine our central myth of the fall, you know, in light of our prehistory. So I think we can understand it in various ways, but, you know, we can't understand it as some sort of literal fall which changed everything overnight, metaphysically. At the same time as we have to re-examine that, we also are faced with the fact that animals and sentient creatures suffered from disease and extinction and predation and all these sorts of things long before we were around. So the problem of evil, in a sense, becomes magnified at the same time that the easy fix for it is undermined. Right.
And this is practically the point where everything breaks down in the myth, our Christian myth, you know, of a pre-lapsarian happy, perfect nature, as in pre-lapsarian. Okay, so let's use less jargon and more reality. So before the so-called fall, everything was fine, perfectly harmonious, no death, no something. Perhaps animals didn't even eat, you know. That's the myth.
Maybe they ate grass or something. Yes.
Yeah, but is that not doing violence to
right,
the plants?
That's right. Yes, yes.
That's an inconsistency of the myth.
I know. Yes.
And so there's this fantastic image of, you know, Wonderland where we only eat air and stuff like that, you know, and then everything collapses after two people chose a different way of looking at things and positioning themselves in the world, you know, where everything collapsed. Look, I am a strong supporter of the view that everything that we do has consequences, but not of an ethical or juridical nature, ontological consequences. We actually, our footsteps, our spin, so to speak, to bring a physics analogy, matter. All these matter, and we shape the world around us willy-nilly. Even when we don't realize it, we still impact the very matrix of reality by being here. And even this conversation has some kind of echoes, reverberations in the nature of things. So I believe this, but this has nothing to do with our current myth, this kind of angelic pre-fall world where not even animals eat plants, you know.
That's right. Yeah.
Because that's doing violence to plants, you know. And then the so-called collapse. I don't buy that, and I always found, perhaps the way you did and do, found it troubling that people have to stick to that kind of idealistic myth, as though that's the cornerstone of their faith, their Christian faith. Why would you reckon an evolutionary view of life and of the cosmos doesn't actually hinder our conviction that the world is God-made, the world is good and destined for a glorious future in the age to come, say? What makes you keep going if you want to address this topic? Why do you reckon an evolutionary perspective doesn't actually contradict this meta-narrative of a Christian hope for the creation?
Well, I think scientific theories in general can do two different things. I mean, one is they can flatten everything, make it more mechanistic, more reductionistic, more predictable. And the other is that they can open it up to extraordinary depths, and you can sort of see little glimpses of what we might call glory, you know, in the natural world. And so I think evolution can act to flatten everything, and it has done in the 20th century, especially. You know, there was a very good job of flattening everything. It was sort of seen as a mechanical process that was more or less, you know, it didn't involve any sort of personality or telos at all, and that certainly doesn't help with the Christian story. But like any scientific theory, it also has another side, and I think the more in depth you go into evolutionary theory, and especially recent understandings like of viral evolution, which is so extraordinary, the more you sort of see this is one instance in which the whole of nature is opening up to extraordinary, sort of almost infinite depths. And so, you know, although I think we have to struggle with it, and we have to struggle to make sure that science is seen in this expansive way and not in the reductionistic way, it helps our understanding of there being some sort of purpose and overall destiny for everything, because I think we get glimpses of it in the natural world. And I think it's hard to really believe all that without getting glimpses of it. And so that's why I think it's so important that we do look at the science, and we do take advantage of the extraordinary depth that is opened up by science. And you know, I mean, there's some people are really good at just going out into nature and they have all these experiences and they don't really need science. But I think for most of us, science is an extraordinary aid to our understanding of the glory of God, in biology and in physics, of course.
That's beautiful. Actually, that I share in this perception, especially what convinced me that this is the right way of approaching reality, by a combination of perspectives, scientific, philosophical, theological, artistic.
Yes.
Is my whatever expertise in early Christianity. And I noticed that without pedantic references and without engaging the sources in critical manner, at least not explicitly, many early Christian theologians who were also trained in the curricular disciplines of their time, or the natural philosophy or whatever, would never shy away from sharing insights, even with ecclesial communities, audiences, insights into the mysteries of the natural world, the way the available sciences allow them to understand those beings and processes and phenomena. And I wonder what happened to us Christians, modern contemporary Christians, why we show so much resistance. Why do we oppose so clearly and unequivocally the world of science? Is it just because some scientists, perhaps most scientists, would push up an agnostic, atheistic agenda? And is that a sufficient reason for ignoring science altogether, wholesale? Because if I look at, for example, Paul, St. Paul, the New Testament author, yes, he belittles the elements of the universe, you know, and tells his Christian readers that they should follow divine wisdom and not sort of seek guidance from the fundamental elements of the natural world. But the very fact that he mentions those fundamental elements shows that he knew of them.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
And that's amazing from my people. I mean,
yeah,
these people, Paul and the like, you know, not to mention more erudite early Christian theologians of the third, fourth generation of Christians, who are so educated. You know, for these people, even when they disagreed with a certain interpretation of reality, they still needed the available sciences, let's call them, in order to locate their discourse at the very core of that mystery of reality. You can't simply ignore and do some fringe biblical jargon in order to refer to reality in the 21st century, the way Paul in the first century couldn't describe the world without making reference to the available sciences.
I completely agree with you. Yes, I do think that the atheistic agenda is partly responsible, the scientific atheistic agenda, which people, they pick up on it even if it's not explicit, you know. And I think it is even explicit in many classrooms still. And so we have to blame both sides, I suppose, you know, not just the Christian side, but also the scientific establishment, which is often quite hostile to religion and still is. I think it's very difficult for many scientists to come out as Christians in their workplaces, I think, especially younger ones. And so that side of it still does exist. And that sometimes makes me despair, because, you know, we've done 50 years of intense science and theology at least, and we don't seem to have made much of a dent on the conservative Christian world, and we don't seem to have made much of a dent on the scientific world and how they view us either. So, you know, that can be a little discouraging. But the work itself, I think, is, you know, speaks for itself. You know, you're right. I agree entirely that the writers of the New Testament and the early church were all interacting with the scientific understandings of their day, and, you know, and words like logos, for example, and wisdom are just so deep and run so deep, and obviously refer to the structures of the universe and what's behind it, as well as to God, and therefore sort of invite us, I think, in to examine the natural world and its wonders as they relate to God.
Yeah. I think an element that most Christians would ignore is the holistic dimension of our worldview, of the Christian worldview. We are somehow the best of Homo sapiens's whatever profile. Christians traditionally have been curious about things. They wanted to make sense of reality. They wanted to understand. I read all these commentaries and homilies on the days of creation, for example, in from the 2nd century onwards. There's a whole tradition of commentary and homily on the days of creation, and none of these authors commits the sin of ignoring the scientific discourse of the day. They all engage the sciences one way or the other, sometimes more reluctant, because of various ideological agendas of the natural scientists or the natural philosophers of the time. Others more relaxed, more embracing, and so on and so forth. But either way, I have this sense of comprehensiveness that traverses the early Christian centuries, which we seem to have lost. And this sense of comprehensiveness, the idea of I cannot be a Christian without understanding God's creation, my home. We have lost this sense for I don't know what kind of narrow view of what matters is the salvation of my soul from my filthy body, stuff like that.
Yes. No, I agree, and I think the holistic worldview is interesting because, especially in New Zealand, I think that we have very strong allies in the Maori understanding of the natural world and an Indigenous understanding in general. That there is life force, that we are, the guardians of nature, all those sorts of things. That there is, that spirit is what matters. All those sorts of things, I think, are a part of an Indigenous understanding of nature, and they see us as having forgotten all of that. And yet, I think, as you say, it's part of our heritage as well. But it has been forgotten in this very individualistic, mechanized understanding of ourselves and the world.
That's very
they help. They help us, I think, to come back to our roots, which were very holistic and very nature.
It's so interesting what you just said. So we contemporary Christians, 21st century Christians, are the product of at least 2 millennia of development in the Christian tradition, and more recently a tradition, say European kind of tradition, that is not so much Christian in its outlook, but there are still voices saying, well, we haven't gotten here to have a modern science without the Christian beginnings of Europe. Okay, so here we are, forgetful of our origins as Christians, and being reminded of the benefit of this more comprehensive approach to reality, which includes a range of disciplines and fields of study and viewpoints, reminded of it, of our natural, I think, inclination towards comprehensiveness and holistic approaches, by a culture which we might consider minor by, say, European standards, or at least out of date European standards. How can indigenous wisdom, which obviously isn't based on the presuppositions of modern science, how could these indigenous, the indigenous wisdom more broadly in Australia, New Zealand, perhaps Canada, United States, how can this wisdom teach us to return to our authentic spirit, even in regard to our relationship or engagement of modern science? Is indigenous wisdom, traditional wisdom, a way back to some kind of normality in our engagement of the scientific culture of our age? If yes, how can that wisdom guide us? I'm interested in this. Why? Because there's, of course, a blatant difference between traditional ways of representing the world, waters, forests, bush, and so on and so forth, the air, and the matter-of-fact chemical analysis of I don't know what bark.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that just at a practical level in New Zealand, Mataranga Māori, or Māori ways of knowing, are being introduced into the science curriculum of schools.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
And so that's created enormous controversy, of course, in the scientific world. But it's almost like a wedge. It opens up this wedge, this a discussion, an entry point for us to also enter in and be partners, I suppose, with Māori and to listen to Māori, but also it is a wedge in secular New Zealand society, that has been opened up. And so I think that there is a possibility of fruitful discourse. I mean, there's also another side which sort of says, everything Christian is post-colonial and therefore should be rejected. So, it's not easy necessarily opening up of that wedge, but I'm always excited by, the Indigenous worldview and how similar it is spiritually, I think, to our understanding. So,
can this Indigenous insight be considered on equal footing with our scientific understanding of reality? I know my question is stupid, and even though I'm no scientist, I can say, well, we know much more about, I don't know, whatever gas clouds in the galaxy and so on and so forth than any indigenous tradition might be aware of. But could we say that there are ways and ways in which we can perceive and articulate our sense of reality, which don't necessarily require only the mathematical formalization of that knowledge, of that insight, is, say, a parable or a metaphor inspired by indigenous wisdom, equal in value and significance with I don't know what kind of cutting-edge scientific theory?
Well, I mean, I think it is important to recognize development and how far, what we have found out in the last century, for example. But on the other hand, I think, going back to the two ways in which science can be understood, in a sort of mechanistic, reductionistic, flat way, or in a more expansive way, I think the Indigenous understanding of nature helps us to go in that direction. And it helps us with our interpretations of what we're discovering. So that if we're recognizing life force, for example, the Maori understanding of Maori or life force, then that will push us in a more, I think, possibly panpsychic direction, perhaps, in our interpretations of science and interpretation. So it's not necessarily that, that an Indigenous understanding of the world will be the end of everything that you need to know about nature. It's more that it will help us to approach what we do know in a particular kind of way, I think.
So, this would be, I mean, comparing the undertaking of comparing, say, the scientific knowledge of the universe or life that we possess today, and traditional indigenous insights into reality would be analogous to what, for example, people like Werner Heisenberg would do in regard to Heraclitus's worldview, the pre-Socratic philosopher. I discovered that not only Heisenberg, but even as recently as works by Michio Kaku refer to Heraclitus as developing certain insights into the nature of reality that are compatible with our, say, quantum perception of reality, even though Heraclitus was definitely unable to equip himself with the mathematical tools and the whole instrument of contemporary science. And they said, both Heisenberg and Kaku say the same kind of stuff, that Heraclitus's insight into reality is perfectly compatible with our own. To give you an example, Heraclitus speaks of fire at the center of reality. Fire is like that life force or energy found at the core of all things. Then I think there's movement, and then there's matter. So it's fire, energy, if you like, movement, and matter, if I remember correctly. And this would be a non-intuitive way of referring to a reality which otherwise we see as trees, koalas, kiwis, and so on and so forth. You know, atmosphere, clouds, and oceans. But if this validation of Heraclitus's worldview in terms of scientific insights into reality is something that we agree to, can we extrapolate this lesson and say, well, Father Mary or the Aboriginal Australians say about the universe, life, ourselves, and so on and so forth, can this be extended to include, or this validation of Heraclitus can be extended to include this kind of indigenous wisdom?
No, I agree, and I think that the examples you give also point to the way in which we access knowledge, which is often very, we're tapping into something very primal and very almost dreamlike, I think, you know, and that the beginnings of many great scientific discoveries are often in the imagination, you know. So obviously they're constrained by the particular problem that we're working on, or the discipline that we're in, but they're tapping into the same sort of sense of reality that we have, that's often accessed in very imaginative ways, and would have been by the ancients as well as by us. You know, you've seen the story of the Indian mathematician Ramanujan, who he used to get his equations by the intercession of a Hindu goddess in his temple, and you know, he could never come up. I mean, he never came up with enough of the working to satisfy Bertrand Russell, but somehow or other he was accessing something that was, you know, very similar to what was being accessed in universities in Cambridge, which I think is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, in other words, it's not so much a matter of how we express our insights, whether it's by way of advanced mathematics today, or metaphors, or whatever sources of inspiration that remain unfathomable, like in Ramanuja's case. So it doesn't matter how we articulate this, in what way we formalize our discourse. What matters is the fact that regardless of where and when we live, we have a certain kind of dreaming about reality, to use your metaphor, a certain insight into reality. And this is where, say, a 21st century astrophysicist meets with indigenous insights into the formation of the galaxy, for example. They have the same kind of perception of things, but their education, their framework, their context determines the shape of their discourse.
And what Polanyi calls the articulate system within which we are working. So if a mathematician, wherever he was, didn't have the the symbols and the equations that he was trying to puzzle out, he wouldn't have gotten any answers. And wherever he was. So I think the articulate system that we develop does sort of matter. And so there is that kind of development, but we often underemphasize, I think, the imaginative part and the what we're tapping into intuitively that gives us answers as well.
Granted, so I don't deny the fact that contemporary sciences give us unprecedented insights into the nature of things, from life on Earth to the universe out there, or the infra-universe, or the subatomic world. No problem with that, and this is why I militate for at least a popular level information in regard to the scientific culture of our age, which I recommend for fellow theologians. But I find it exciting that, again, to refer to your metaphor of dreaming, that our dreams about reality are somehow the same. We might be more proficient in describing reality when we are equipped with scientific concepts and instruments. But in essence, it's this kind of fascination with the mystery of reality, regardless of how we articulate it. You know why is this so interesting, at least to me? It's because one of the things that, at least in my kind of church, is being said is that, well, the church fathers of late antiquity were God-inspired, and therefore whatever they said about the natural world was divinely sanctioned. And therefore, there's no point in learning the sciences, studying the world within our current context, because everything that was worth saying about life and the cosmos and so on and so forth was already said in the 4th century, or up to the 14th century if you are generous. And listening to you and realizing this, and I hope I don't misinterpret you too much. I know I misinterpret things because I draw everything back to me.
Oh, we all do, yes.
Yeah, but at least I'm not ashamed to say it. I feel inspired by what you say, and if we are able to bridge somehow our scientific culture and the intuition or intuitions of traditional societies up and about in the here and now, then this allows us Christians to transcend a bit our blockage, our cultural blockage, and realize that regardless of how we articulate mythologically or otherwise our perception and understanding of reality, there's room for new insights. There's room for new articulations of these insights, and therefore there's no point in denying science just because Saint Basil the Great in the 4th century had said this or that about meteors and atmospheric phenomena.
No, exactly. Yes, no, I completely agree with you, and I think it opens up Christianity to the wisdom, of cultures that it has long excluded. And I've learned a lot from some of my PhD students. I had a student who was looking at Aboriginals Christology pre-contact. So the whole idea, that in Aboriginal wisdom there was already an understanding of Christ. And I had another student who did.
Sorry, because this is fascinating. How did the person, and how do you as supervisor account for this? So an awareness of Christ, perhaps with inverted commas, in pre-Christian cultures?
Well, I mean, it's of course there's a certain ambiguity in what exactly is meant by it, But this is a self-understanding from some of the Aboriginal. She did a lot of time interacting with Aborigines and listening to how they understand it. But we can sort of make connections, I think, with a wisdom understanding. That I mean, she was coming from a Catholic perspective that many Catholic theologians are working with, and that if we really believe that Christ is the incarnation of wisdom, well, wisdom was present to all cultures and in some form, and it's not surprising that they understand that as a sort of pre-understanding of Christ, and that they therefore, in the best of circumstances, which never happened, they would sort of recognize almost that this was, the I suppose, incarnation of what they have already understood as Christ. I had a Korean student who also sort of said that the understanding of Dao or kill in Korean should be seen almost as an Old Testament, a preparation for I am the way, the truth, and the life. And
Wow.
so, there are lots of these ideas out there, I think, that are coming out at the moment.
Well, I'm very happy to hear it, because what I read when I study, say, 2nd century Christian theology, one of my more recent interests, is this sense of not coming out of the blue. Christianity isn't something that popped up out of nowhere in the Mediterranean basin. It's actually it has been prepared by this, let's call it, historical activity of the divine wisdom, the divine logos in humanity and in the creation, to the extent that most nations, most peoples of the ancient world were readied, prepared for embracing Christ and the gospel. Even in the 4th century, in the early 4th century, there was this church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, who wrote a book, Preparation for the Gospel, and he looked at antecedent cultures, their values and their quest for values for Christ, if you like, and for the gospel, and discovering that the word of God, the logos of God, spoke in many ways to many other cultures, preparing them for the gospel. Otherwise, there's no point in having the disciples sent to preach to the convert in the world, preach to the choir, because this is what they were doing. They didn't preach of unknown gods. They preached of what those people around the world were already seeking.
Exactly, and I think those cultures can then teach us in turn
what we have forgotten.
What wisdom really means, and that's the two-way listening that I think hasn't happened a lot, especially in recent centuries. Yeah,
that's amazing. Wow. Well, this has been very refreshing, Nicola. It's always a joy talking to you, and I'd like to continue, if you agree, to return to more specific topics, perhaps those that are very dear to you in terms of research and your outputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has been indeed my honor and joy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola.